In this little snippet of folklore, I will tell you a tale of the Habetrot. The Habetrot is one of the fae folk that lives on the borders of the countries of England and Scotland, and is renowned far and wide for her skill as a spinner. She is supreme at all spinning crafts. A folklore warning from the borderlands tells that should you ever step on the ground where the unchristened lay in their eternal sleep, to do this would bring on a case of the grave merrills, grave scab. This illness would cause a shortness of breath, sore, trembling limbs and fevered skin. The only cure was to have sack made of linen spun by the Habetrot. The sack must be of linen grown in a field that has been fertilised with manure from a farm untouched for 40 years. The linen must be bleached in an honest miller's mill dam, and all stitched together by an honest tailor. There is a tale from Selkirkshire, although a similar one is also told in Germany and Norway, that is all about a Habetrot and her 3 sisters as spinsters. Habetrot was a strange-looking thing with deformed lips, and her sisters were no better. Scantly Mab, it was said, had splayfoot, and Aukasand a huge flat thumb. So let's have a tale of the Habetrot. There was once a matron who had but one daughter, pretty as the flowers but idle as the fat farm cat. She would wander the lanes and through the meadows, picking flowers, listening to the birds. The woman was sorely disappointed and very worried. No decent man would want her daughter for a wife, as she was so very lazy. All good men of that time wanted a wife who could help the household, spinning being a necessity. She shouted at her daughter, threatened her, she even beat her now and then in sheer frustration. But nothing worked. The daughter remained an idle cutty, as she called her. Finally, one spring morning, utterly at the end of her wits, the good wife had had enough. She threw 7 heads of lint at her daughter and told her she would take no excuse this time. The girl must spin the lint that the yarn needed. She had but 3 days to do this. Something was very different this time, the girl noticed. Her mother really meant what she said. The lazy girl sat down to work at her distaff to make the thread. However, she had not the skill needed. Her skill had only been picking flowers and listening to birds, and leaving her poor mother to do all the work. By the evening of the 2nd day, she had finished hardly anything. Her soft-skinned fingers were sore, full of blisters, and what she had spun, well, it was just awful. That night, tears streamed over her pillow. Eventually, she cried herself to sleep. As the sun rose, she woke, and she threw all her work to the floor and ran out into the fields. All around her the dew sparkled as diamonds. She walked and walked, and eventually reached a pretty place to sit and rest. She sat upon a knoll where the prettiest of flowers grew, and by the side bubbled a small stream. All about her was shaded by woodbine and the wild scented roses. She placed her pretty face in her hands and started to cry again. Little by little her sobs ceased, and she dried her eyes and looked up. By the stream was now sat an old woman, sat in the sunshine on a self-bored stone, drawing thread with a distaff. She was a peculiar-looking woman, the girl noticed, with puffed, thick, wide, fat lips. The girl, curious, stood and stepped over to the old lady. She smiled at her and asked, why did she have such long, thick lips? The old lady smiled back, quite pleased at the friendliness of the pretty girl, and replied that it was due to spinning thread. Spinners, she explained, needed to constantly wet their fingers from their lip to draw the thread neatly with the distaff. The girl listened politely and then explained how she too should be spinning, but it was just no use. She just could not do it. The old lady smiled with her thick lips and said never mind, she would do it for her if she brought all that she had been given. The girl instantly took to her heels and ran back to her cottage. She gathered all the lint and her discarded thread. She bundled them into her skirts and ran back to where the old lady still sat. She handed all of it over to her new friend and asked what she was called. Where should she collect the spun thread later that day? But no reply came. The woman merely walked through the trees and the bushes and disappeared. Astonished, the girl wandered here and there to see if she could find her new friend, but nothing could be found at all. She sat down to think about this on the pretty knoll, and with thinking and thinking, and little by little, she fell into a doze, and then was sound asleep. When she woke from her dreams, she could not believe it. It was already evening, and the sky was losing its colour. Causleen, the evening star, was already bright in the heavens, and the moon was slowly beginning her path higher and higher into the heavens. As she looked on at the star, a rough small voice came from the stone where the old lady had been sat that morning. The girl moved quietly nearer. Prickles formed on her arms. What was this strange noise? She crept to the stone and placed her ear by the hole. From somewhere deep in the earth came a voice. "Ah, little kens the wee lassie on the brae head that my name be Habetrot." This is what she heard, and peeping into the hole, she saw the old lady in a cavern, walking back and forth. Around her were a group of spinners, spinsters, all sat on collody stones, those white stones and pebbles found in rivers, all spinning away merrily. All had the same thick, long grey lips of the old lady. Another working there sat in the corner, winding in the finished yarn. She had the same thick lips, but also eyes that seemed to want to pop out of her head, and a very long hooked nose. She carried on watching. The old lady, her friend Habetrot, she now knew, spoke to this strange-looking old woman, calling her scantly Mab, giving her instruction to bundle the yarn together. It was time to give the girl the finished work, so she in turn could give it to her mother. The girl stepped back from the stone with the hole and slipped quietly back to her mother's cottage, filled with delight and astonishment. Before she could reach the door, Habetrot had caught her up and gave the girl the beautifully spun yarn. The girl asked what on earth could she do in return for such a kind favour, to which Habetrot replied, nothing at all was needed. Only one thing, she must never ever tell her mother who had spun the yarn from the lint. The pretty girl could not believe her luck. She carried on the way to the cottage. Inside was the scent of cooking. Her mother had spent all day making sausages and black puddings and setting them on strings to dry high in the eaves. Her mother was not there, but she could hear her upstairs fast asleep. At the sight of the sausages and puddings, the girl's stomach growled. Suddenly she was ravenous. She placed all her yarn on a table carefully, and she took a sausage and a pudding and stoked the fire. One by one she fried them up, one by one she collected another, and she ate them all until not a single one was left. At last, exhausted from so much food and such a strange day, she climbed the stairs to bed. Early next morning, the mother of the house rose. She prepared herself for the day and walked down to the kitchen. And what a sight she saw! All the sausages and puddings had gone, and yet, on the table, all the soft yarn was there, spun so perfectly. She was a tangle of emotions, annoyed and so pleased in equal measure. She picked up her skirts and ran into the road, shouting, "My daughter's spun seeing, my daughter's eaten seeing, and all before daylight." A young lord who was passing by on his horse stopped at the sight and sound of this strange woman. He calmed her down finally and asked what on earth was she talking about, to which she repeated the same thing. "My daughter, she spun seeing. My daughter's eaten seeing, all before daylight, and if you dinna believe me, why not come in and see it?" The lord was curious now. He jumped down from his splendid horse and followed the matron into the cottage. On the table he saw the yarn that the woman was speaking of. He studied it, so fine, so perfect. He asked if he could see the spinner of such wonderful thread. Of course the mother, so proud and happy, ran to fetch her daughter from her sleep. Back came the mother, and with a pretty, blushing and very tousle-haired rustic girl. At sight of her his heart thumped loudly, and his breath caught in his throat. He had fallen in love at first sight. He had been lonely for many a long while, and had been searching for a wife who was an excellent spinner for such a long, long time. He asked for her hand, and the date of the wedding was set. The wedding day came, and the girl was filled with worry and shame. Her new husband would soon learn she was no spinner, useless at such skill. And now old Habetrot appeared to the girl again. Why? Well, nobody knows. Why this girl and no others? The young bride asked her old friend what on earth she should do. As Habetrot knew, she was useless at spinning. Habetrot grinned a sly grin. "Well," she said, "bring your bonny bridegroom to my cave. He shall see what becomes of spinning, and then he will never tie you to the spinning wheel." The girl agreed, frightened and concerned, but hopeful that her friend could help. The next day, the newlyweds were together, and the bride asked her husband would he follow her because she had something to show him. Of course he agreed. How could he not? Whatever would make his wife happy. She led him to the knoll, still scattered with pretty flowers, the brook still bubbling nearby. She took his hand and showed him the self-bored stone, and asked him to look through and see what he could see there. The groom was astonished at what he saw there. He could see a great cavern. Inside was an old woman who was dancing wildly and chanting to more old women who were sat at their spinning wheels and distaffs, industrious and creating music with their crafting. And this is what he heard old Habetrot say: "We who live in dreary den are both rank and foul to see, hidden frae the glorious sun that teems the fair earth's canopy. Ever must be our evenings lone be spent upon the collody stone. Cheerless is the evening grey when Cowsleen hath died away, but ever bright and ever fair are they who breathe this evening air, and lean upon the self-bored stone, unseen by all but me alone." And now the chant was finished. Scantly Mab, with her grey bulging eyes and her hook nose, asked what on earth did she mean by that last line. Habetrot explained that there was one whom she had invited there, and he had heard her strange song through the self-bored stone. Now she jumped up and opened a door that had been hidden by old tree roots. She invited the newlyweds to come into her home and meet her family. This the bridal pair did. The Lord was astonished all the more at the sight of such strange company. One by one he asked of the old ladies assembled there why their lips were so strange and distorted, and one by one they replied in struggling voices because of their strange lips and twisted mouths, and as best they could make themselves understood, that this was due to spinning. Old Habetrot explained better, with subtle hints and sly smiles, that should he ask his wife to spin so much and so beautifully, should she even wish to spin herself, well, her lips too would grow so fat and full and long. All her looks would be gone as theirs had gone. At that, while still in this cavern full of the spinsters, he insisted there and then his wife should never spin another thread, never touch the spinning wheel. It was not at all important to him as her perfection in herself. He kept his word too. She never had to lift a finger to spin once in her life. Instead, she would walk with him through the lanes and the meadows, picking the flowers and listening to the birds as she had always loved. And it is said that all the flax that was grown in the Lord's fields was sent to Habetrot and her spinster sisters to spin the yarn that they were so perfect at. A happy ending, after all. It's lovely to hear of a friendly member of the good folk, Habetrot and her sisters. Although they look different, they have good natures. Thank you for listening to this little tale. I hope you enjoyed it, I know I did. If you did like this little snippet of folklore, please subscribe to the channel. Let's try and grow this channel and share our stories together and spread the word. For now, dear friends, and until next time, keep well, brightest of blessings, and remember, don't play with the fairy folk, or you may end up in one of my folk tales yourself.